Hello everyone, we are Ithar, Claire, Jasmine and Sophia, and our project is on updating and reviewing the internal clinic student manuals. We would like to thank the following people for their help during this time. Student manuals are readily available resource to all students in podiatry participating in the internal student clinic. These manuals aim to prepare students to work within the frameworks and guidelines set out by relevant organizations by ensuring that students practice safely and effectively and uphold professional conduct. There is a need for updating clinic manuals regularly, as guidelines provided by Australian Podiatry Council, Podiatry Board of Australia, and National Health and Medical Research Council that form the content of the manuals are constantly changing. As students are required to meet the standard and be proficient in the procedures outlined by these guidelines, it's important to update the podiatry student manuals to ensure that the information is current and it contains the necessary recommendations provided by the guidelines. In addition, there is evidence about students being non-compliant toward reading the manuals. Most students are also unsure what the clinic supervisors expect from them in internal and external clinic, and the students are unaware about the necessary resources available to prepare them for placement. As students are expected to know and understand the information provided by the internal clinic and infection control manuals, the reason for the manuals being underused must be recognized and addressed. Our aim is to improve the quality of the clinic manuals to adhere to all the recommendations from best practice guidelines and meet the needs of students and expectations of clinic supervisors. We also aim to establish a yearly review process to ensure the manuals continuously fulfill changing best practice guidelines and student needs, so that the manuals will be able to help students become competent and safe practitioners. The project was broken into three main objectives. First objective is to ensure that clinic manuals follow the current recommended guidelines. Second objective is to create manuals with videos that students will find interesting and useful. Last objective is to establish a review process to ensure sustained annual updates of the clinic manuals to meet the changing needs of students and supervisors' expectations and stay current with the latest best practice guidelines.
The project processes follow the PDSA cycle, which provides an environment for small-scale interventions to be evaluated and adapted to suit the needs of the situation based on the data collected during the cycle. The project follows the 4 stages of plan, which describes the improvement the project aims to achieve, and a brief description of the plan. Do, which includes carrying out the plan and recording any data of observations. Study, which provides an opportunity to analyze the results obtained from the project to determine if the objectives of the project were met, and Act, which involves determining how the lessons learned from the project can be used to improve the intervention. In the plan phase, we started by scoping the project. This identifies the aim and objectives and deliverables, which were established through gathering background information and project supervisor expectations. We also determined the scope of the problems through 2 approaches. Firstly, a pre-update survey was issued to the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th year podiatry students to determine whether students utilized the manual, found it helpful, and what changes they would like to see. The results are examined later in the presentation. We also sourced for guidelines from authoritative organizations such as the PBA, NHMRC, and POD5PPJ to determine the recommended information that the internal clinic manuals are expected to have. These recommendations were recorded in a checklist, which was used to identify and record gaps in information in the student manuals. After scoping the extent of the problem, a series of tasks were planned to achieve our objectives. The deadline for each task, delegation, and the submission of each deliverable were recorded in a Gantt chart. We started the next step in the PDSA cycle of Do by beginning to form the first draft of the manuals. The following information were considered when writing the manuals, which are feedback obtained from the pre-update surveys, gaps in information identified by the checklist of recommendations from guidelines, and the feedback obtained from the clinic technician and project supervisor. Before trialing the manuals, they were first appraised using the checklist of recommendations obtained from the guidelines to ensure the manual encompasses the latest information and meets the recommendations, which is one of the project's objectives. The manuals were also reviewed through meetings with the clinic technician and project supervisor to ensure that the manual's information is accurate and meets their expectations. Using feedback obtained from the clinic technician and project supervisor, the manuals were edited to include their suggestions. Once the final draft of the manuals were approved by them, audiovisual resources were created to help students visualize key procedures in the clinic, such as sharps injury and sterilization procedures. The scripts for the videos were formed based on information from the final draft of the manuals, and were filmed in the clinic. The videos were reviewed with the clinic technician before being uploaded into YouTube, with links to the videos being included in relevant sections of the student manuals. The third phase of the PDSA cycle of study involved evaluating the final draft of the manual and video accompaniments through a post-update survey. Copies of the new manuals were distributed into a small group of 12 podiatry students, and they were asked to fill the survey after reading the manuals. Lastly, in the final stage of the PDSA cycle of ACT, We gathered the data obtained in the post-update surveys and evaluated the results. We also reviewed any obstacles that we have recorded when we were forming the manuals. Any lessons learned through this evaluation were recorded under limitations and recommendations, which will be explained later on in the slides. We also established the processes of a review system for the student manuals, which can be implemented yearly to ensure that the manuals always contain updated information from the guidelines and meet the changing needs of the students and expectations of the clinicians and podiatry department staff.
After creating the Gantt chart, we plan to gather data on what students and clinicians felt was needed in the manuals. Although we could not completely adhere to our initial plan due to limitations in our project, we provided a checklist for future project groups to be guided on how to update the manuals, which includes the feedback we felt we could not implement during this time. During the course of our project, we consistently referred back to our project supervisor and clinic technician as they provided us with the feedback to guide our subsequent course of action. Gathering the data required to revamp the student manuals to address the students' needs included distributing hard copies of surveys to 211 podiatry students from the 2nd, 3rd and 4th years. The questions and feedback we received were as follows. For the first question, we found that only 59% of students had actually read the student manuals. This created a need for us to identify reasons on why students have not read the manuals and to correct this issue. For the second question, the majority of students stated that they did not have the time to read the manuals and that the manual was too long and boring. This confirmed that we should recreate and update the student manuals to be easily readable and concise. As you can see, we did this by firstly making the new manuals more visually engaging. Our first update included adding images into the manuals and making relevant changes to the current information. Question 3. Despite the lack of students reading the manuals, 82% of students found that the information contained was informative. This figure stresses the importance of students to read the manuals, as most found that if they had read it, they took more away from it. For question 4, many students stated that infection control, hand hygiene, and expectations of clinicians was what they had learned most from the manuals, indicating that the newly updated manuals needed to include more details on the other topics to encourage student learning. Therefore, when we updated the manuals, we added images to show where items are kept in a clinic, hand hygiene guidelines, a guide to clinic documentation, and finally a checklist to guide clinical presentations.
One of the most common requests regarding the manual was a list for common conditions seen in the clinic and how to treat and manage them. By project supervisor recommendations, we created a worksheet for students to work through. We also added several extra resources for easy access during consultations at the back of the manual. For question 5, majority of the students wanted more pictures, followed by the improvement of the length of the manuals. To provide an alternative, engaging visual resource for students to improve readability of the manuals, we created videos regarding sterilisation procedures and sharps disposal guidelines at the internal clinic. As the previous project group had created videos about general knowledge of the clinic, these were the two we felt were needed. Question 6. Students requested for strapping and padding as the most desired topic for additional information, followed by orthotics and locations of items in the clinic. Despite this feedback, there were already resources available to students on these topics. Hence, we included details on where to find these resources in the internal clinic student manual. Question 7. Despite 64% of students responding yes to this question, we found difficulty in adding submission dates due to the changing dates every year and the volume of year levels to tailor to. Therefore, we did not include this in the updated manuals. Question 8. Similarly to question 7, a majority of students responded yes. However, we felt that this also conflicted with the necessity of keeping the manual information short and concise. And finally, question 9, of the students that did read the manual, there was an overwhelming response that the manual did prepare students for the internal clinic. From the pre-update survey, we found that there was a necessity to improve the manuals into a clinic Bible for students to refer back to when they needed. A checklist containing the recommendations from infection control guidelines developed by the NHMRC, POD5PPJ and PBA were used to evaluate if they were met in the previous infection control manual. We found that certain recommendations were not included or not updated, such as the list of recommended immunisations for podiatrists and the lack of explanation of how infectious agents are transmitted. These gaps of information were filled using information provided by the guidelines. To ensure currency of information and to provide an additional resource, relevant sections of the recently updated guidelines were added into the appendix of the infection control manual to ensure the recommendations were met and that students were able to refer to these guidelines for further information. In response to the feedback from students in the pre-update survey, readability of the manuals were improved through the addition of photos, video links, and how to conduct certain procedures and diagrams. Study tips were also included to aid students in their preparation for exams. The manual was also developed based on the feedback of the clinic technician, which included updating and adding more information and tips on the aspects of infection control like autoclave testing and usage. Due to low student adherence in reading the manual, a short worksheet with questions based upon its content was developed and added to encourage students to locate and read it. After we finalised our manuals, we sent a post-update survey along with the new and old manuals to a small group of podiatry students from 2nd, 3rd and 4th year levels to determine whether there was an improvement in the manual delivery. Overall, we found that students were more inclined to read the manuals, that they were more user-friendly, and that they provided a deeper insight into the internal clinic and infection control topics compared to the old manuals. A number of limitations were challenged during the process of our project. This includes the preliminary survey limitations. As most students do not read the internal clinic manuals, some of the feedback we received were inaccurate, making it difficult for us to identify the real issues regarding the manual and how we can address it. Moreover, not all students answered every question in the survey, thus there may not be sufficient data obtained. For the manual, although we expected the manuals to be shorter and easier readability, the final product was much longer than the previous manuals due to the addition of pictures, more information to overcome gaps in information, and to achieve the feedback from the project supervisor. Furthermore, while we improve the readability of the student manual, it does not serve its purpose if students themselves are unwilling to read it, which would then affect the students' readiness to participate in clinic. Also, the feedback from clinic supervisors to improve the student manuals were not obtained due to time constraints, as most members of the team undertake external placements after the first draft of the manuals were published. The post-survey only involved a small group of podiatry students due to time constraints. Therefore, the results of the survey would not be able to represent the views of the entire second, third and fourth year cohort of podiatry students. As a result, we are unable to provide appropriate recommendations on how to improve the manuals and review system for the next year. Limitation on establishing a review system. Although the review system is intended to run annually, it may not be worthwhile as the recommended guidelines are not updated yearly. It is difficult to predict when the guidelines would be updated and when the manual should be updated, making it difficult to implement the review system each year.
Based on the data and observations we have obtained throughout the whole project, the following recommendations were made to improve the project. There are 2 short-term recommendations that we have provided. Firstly, we recommend making links to the video resources available on LMS under the relevant subject tabs. This makes them easier to access for students to help them in clinic. The supervisors and subject coordinators can also make the location of the resources known by announcing it during internal student clinic and during orientation. Secondly, a worksheet was provided at the end of the manual. We recommend that this worksheet be used as a part of a competency requirement for second and third year students to complete before starting internal clinic. This will encourage the students to look through the manuals and see what content it has to offer to aid them in their preparation. In the long term, we recommend improving student numbers for the post-update trial by conducting it earlier in the semester, so that participants are given more time to participate in the surveys. Lastly, although it was not achieved in this project, gathering the feedback from internal and external clinic supervisors will be beneficial, as students will be aware of what is expected of them in the clinic and what it means to be a competent practitioner.
After evaluating the final results of the project, we determined that the project had managed to meet its objectives. The manuals met the recommended guidelines and contained the latest information, and students found them more useful than the previous manuals for their clinic preparation. The audio-visual resources were also well received by the students. A review system was established, and recommendations to improve it were provided to better ensure its success in producing student manuals that are relevant and helpful for students to become competent clinicians in their placement. However, while the manuals are improved to help students achieve competency, we acknowledge that the lack of student initiative to use and rate the manuals greatly affects its effectiveness in preparing students for clinic. Hence, more interventions to improve student adherence to the manuals should be considered alongside improving the manuals to help them achieve competency.